They pulled me off the Reno job at 6 in the morning. I was 3 days into a chemical residue analysis at a decommissioned water treatment plant. Routine containment work, the kind where you already know the answer before you file the report. When my phone buzzed with a priority recall from the director's office. Kemp's office. That was unusual. In 15 years with the Bureau of Anomalous Material Assessment, I had received exactly 2 direct assignments from Director Kemp. Both had turned out to be jurisdictional favors for other agencies. Paperwork dressed up as fieldwork. My name is Martin Dole. I am a senior field analyst for BAMA, one of those federal agencies that exists in the gap between what the government admits to investigating and what actually needs investigating. We assess material anomalies, objects, sites, substances, and structural phenomena outside established physical explanation. Most of our caseload is mundane. Mineral deposits that do not match local geology, construction materials with unusual isotopic signatures, sealed containers that gain or lose mass between inspections. The agency runs on documentation rather than drama. I walk into rooms, examine what should not be there, and write reports explaining what it is, or confirming that I cannot explain it. The Philadelphia assignment arrived with a briefing packet that was mostly redacted. A vault beneath a bank building in Center City. Federal Reserve subvault, decommissioned in 1971. 3-ton door, electromagnetic locks, no breach record in over 50 years of closure. A structural survey crew, mandated by updated seismic codes, had opened the vault for the first time since the Nixon administration. They found something inside and called us. The packet did not say what they found. That omission was the first thing that felt wrong. I arrived in Philadelphia on a Tuesday afternoon and met my forensic escort at the bank's service entrance. 2 technicians from our regional office, a man named Pruitt and his junior partner, Garza. Pruitt was experienced enough to keep his speculation to himself. Garza kept checking the radiographic scanner like he expected it to bite him. The vault was 3 levels below street grade, accessible through a freight elevator that groaned under our equipment cases. The corridor at the bottom was unlit, and our headlamps picked up the walls in flat grey sections. Poured concrete, standard mid-century federal specification. The vault door stood open at the end of the corridor, its locking bolts retracted into recesses furred with dust. Survey crew cut power to the maglocks yesterday morning, Pruitt said. Building manager confirmed the seals were intact up to that point. No record of entry since 71. I stepped through the doorway. The vault was roughly 5 meters square, bare concrete on all surfaces, stripped of shelving and fixtures. Whatever the Federal Reserve had stored here had been removed before decommissioning. The room should have been empty. The man was standing in the rear wall. Standing is the wrong word, but the eye insists on it. A mummified human figure, upright, embedded in the concrete from the shoulders down. The head and upper chest protruded from the wall surface. The left arm extended forward and slightly outward, locked rigid, intersecting a length of rebar. The bone passed through the steel, or the steel passed through the bone. Both materials shared the same poor line, as though they had been placed together in the formwork and set simultaneously. The wall was continuous around him. The surface showed no sign of repair, patching, or later intrusion. The man and the concrete were a single material event. His face was intact, desiccated, darkened, the skin pulled tight against the skull, but clearly male, clearly modern in bone structure and dental work. I could see composite fillings in the visible upper teeth, a material that had been in common use for maybe 30 years. His clothing stopped me. I recognized it. Grey field suit, reinforced shoulders, double-stitched chest pocket with a bureau-standard closure tab. The current model. I was wearing the same suit. Pruitt, photograph everything from the doorway before we get closer. Full radiographic sweep of the wall section, continuous, floor to ceiling. Both sides if we can access the adjacent space. Adjacent room is backfilled, Pruitt said. Structural survey noted it. Solid pour on the other side. Then we scan from this side only. Full depth, every frequency we have. The radiographic images came back in 20 minutes and made the situation worse. The skeleton continued behind the visible wall surface. The bones extended through the concrete the way aggregate does, randomly, integrally, without any cavity that could have received a body after the pour. The man had become part of the matrix itself. At the resolution our scanner could manage, the boundary between bone and concrete appeared seamless. I examined the right hand last. The fingers curled around a small, heavy rectangular object, and both the hand and the object were fused into the wall together. I could see the edge of the device where it emerged from the concrete surface. A dark casing material, dense with a fine-grained texture I could not identify. The casing showed no manufacturer's mark, visible seams or screw housings. I photographed it from 6 angles, measured the visible dimensions as best I could without extraction, and logged the material as unknown pending laboratory analysis. "What is that?" Gaza asked. He had stayed near the door for most of the examination, which was the smartest thing he had done all day. "I don't know yet. Could be a tool, a container, an instrument. It's fused into the pour the same way the rest of him is." "And the suit?" I looked at the dead man's chest pocket. The Bureau's asset tag was still sewn into the lining, visible where the fabric had split along one dried fold. I could read the tag format. It was current, the version introduced 6 years ago. "The suit is ours," I said. "Current issue. Same model we're wearing." Nobody had a useful response to that. I filed my preliminary report from the hotel that evening. I flagged the clothing anachronism, the unidentified device, the material continuity between the remains and the 51-year-old wall, and the absence of any entry point. I recommended full extraction of the wall section for laboratory analysis. The report was thorough, cautious, and clearly written. I have filed over 400 reports in my career, and am particular about their quality. Within 12 hours, my report was reclassified to a clearance tier above my own access. Kemp's office handled the reclassification personally. I had never been locked out of my own work before. I noted it, filed a procedural query that I knew would go unanswered, and accepted my next assignment. At that point, I still believed the system was functioning. Kemp's office used the same priority code when it pulled me again. The second packet concerned a biometric containment vault beneath a decommissioned research annex in Los Alamos, New Mexico. The vault had been installed in 2004 as part of a materials security upgrade. Beneath it lay the original 1940s foundation, and beneath that, an older slab, 1920s ranch construction that predated the laboratory complex entirely. The corpse was on the vault floor. I recognized the face immediately. The same dark hollows around the eye sockets, same jaw structure, same composite dental work. He was face up this time, positioned as though he had fallen backward from a standing posture and struck the floor, except the floor had absorbed him. His clothing was agency standard, same model, same size, same wear pattern as Philadelphia. His mouth was packed with concrete, a grey-white calcium compound that, when I tested it against our materials database, matched the chemical signature of the 1920s ranch foundation 3 structural layers below. Concrete from a pour, nearly 80 years old, had filled the dead man's mouth and set there, hard as the day it cured. "We need to get him off this floor," I told the extraction team. "Careful cuts. I want the body and a surrounding margin of floor material intact for transport." They started cutting. Diamond-tipped saw, water-cooled, the blade singing through the 2004-era vault slab. The cut reached the expected depth, roughly 30 centimeters, and kept going. The bone continued. We mapped it by scanner. The skeleton extended downward from the vault floor into the 1940s foundation below, passing through the boundary between the 2 pores, as though the boundary did not exist. Below that, the bones continued into the 1920s slab. 3 distinct construction eras, each built decades apart, and the same skeleton threaded through all 3, integrated with each layer at the material level. The scan showed solid continuity throughout. The man's body had become load-bearing. We could not remove him without demolishing the entire foundation down to bedrock. I stood over the dead man's face and made myself look at the details I did not want to confirm. The composite fillings, the suit model, the asset tag inside the chest pocket, readable under magnification, printed in the same format I had seen in Philadelphia. These were not planted bodies. Nothing had entered these vaults. This man, this same man, was arriving inside structural material. His body was appearing within concrete at the moment of its original pour, decades before his clothing existed, and remaining there embedded, until someone opened the vault and found him. I photographed everything. I made detailed notes. Then I did something I had never done in 15 years of government service. I copied my files to a personal device and left the building with them. The Philadelphia report had been taken from me once. I was not going to let it happen again. When I returned to Arlington, I pulled what I could through a contact in records, fragments of other case files, incident reports that had been reclassified by Kemp's office within 72 hours of submission. There were more corpses, a bank vault in Zurich, a military bunker in Colorado Springs, a government archive in Ottawa, a private collection vault in Sao Paulo, an anchorage site referenced only by coordinates and a weather-damaged extraction log. Every file described the same man. Every body was fused into the structural material of a sealed, secure site. Some were partial, some were complete. Some had been detected only because a renovation crew found a hand, a jaw, a device casing, or a length of field suit embedded where no body could have been placed. In one partially redacted file, I found a project designation, Keystone. The context was a requisition form for temporal calibration equipment, field-rated, single operator. The form was countersigned by Kemp. It was dated 3 years before the earliest known corpse. Attached to a medical clearance form in the same file, I found a personnel photograph. The face was the same face I had been examining in walls and floors for the past month. The name on the form was Patrick Lusk, Field Recovery Specialist, Grade 7. His status was listed as active. I requested a meeting with Kemp the following morning. He agreed within the hour, which told me he had been expecting the request. His office was on the 4th floor of the Arlington building, carpeted, windowed, unremarkable, except for the wall-mounted geological survey maps that most visitors probably mistook for decoration. Kemp was 62, grey-haired, and built like a man who had spent his early career carrying equipment through difficult terrain. He'd been director for 11 years. "You found Keystone," he said before I sat down. He poured coffee from a carafe on his credenza and set a mug on the edge of his desk without offering it to me. "I found bodies of the same man in sealed vaults on 4 continents," I said. "I found a classified program that sends a living operative backward through structural history using equipment I've never heard of, and I found your signature on the authorization." 7 confirmed external sites, Kemp said. 8 if you count Anchorage, though detection there was partial. Different analyst handled that one before you were assigned. Why was I assigned? Because you're the best field reader I have, and I needed someone who could evaluate the vault sites without pre-existing assumptions. Your reports from Philadelphia and Los Alamos confirmed what I suspected about the material integration. That the same man is dying in multiple foundations. That the bodies are becoming more complete. Earlier events showed partial fusion, a limb, a torso section. Recent ones show full skeletal integration across multiple structural eras. The process is accelerating. He said it the way he might have described a budget trend. Kemp was a career administrator who had come up through geological survey before pivoting to anomalous materials. He understood physical evidence. He understood institutional risk. He managed both with the same flat competence. "The man's name is Patrick Lusk," I said. "His file says he's still active." "He is still active. The corpses are transit failures. The calibrator has a margin of error. When the margin exceeds tolerance, the operative's body integrates with the target structure instead of displacing through it. Patrick knows the risk. He accepts it. What is he trying to recover? Kemp drank his coffee before answering. The program targets an object we've designated Meridian. It was first documented in 1887, embedded in the limestone foundation of a building in Schuylkill County, Pennsylvania. The object exhibits a property we call architectural migration. It moves forward through time by incorporating itself into successive layers of construction. Every time a structure is demolished and rebuilt on the same site, or using the same materials, Meridian transfers into the new foundation, deeper each time, always into the most secure construction available. And the calibrator sends Lusk backward to intercept it. The calibrator displaces a single operator through the structural history of a specific site. Lusk arrives inside the concrete of the target era, protected by a field generated by a handheld component he carries. When the field works, the hardened material behaves like loose aggregate around him. He can move through it, locate the object, and extract it. When the field fails, he becomes part of the wall. Yes. Why keep going? Kemp set down his mug. Because a material capable of surviving demolition, reconstruction, redistribution, and temporal displacement is not an artifact you leave wandering through global infrastructure. If we retrieve Meridian, we study it. If we study it, we may learn how to contain it. If someone else retrieves it first, we lose that chance. That is the rationale. That is the least classified version of it. How many times have you sent him? That's compartmented. How many times, Kemp? More than the corpse count suggests. Some transits produce no recoverable remains. Some produce remains too deeply embedded to detect. The number is classified because the operational security of the program depends on limiting knowledge of the failure rate. He offered to show me the Keystone facility. He offered to let me meet Patrick Lusk. He framed both offers as professional courtesy, a chance for his best field analyst to evaluate the program's physical infrastructure with fresh eyes. I accepted because I needed to see the calibrator and the man it was consuming. I also accepted because Kemp's willingness to show me troubled me more than his secrecy had. A director who hides a program is protecting it. A director who suddenly opens a program is using you for something you have not yet identified. The Keystone facility occupied a reinforced sub-level beneath our own headquarters. I had worked in the Arlington building for 9 years and never known it was there. The freight elevator descended past the 2 basement levels I was familiar with and continued to a third that did not appear on any architectural plan I had ever reviewed. The doors opened onto a corridor with walls over 2 meters in thickness. I could tell from the door frames, which were set deep enough to walk through. The transit chamber was at the corridor's end. A concrete-walled room, roughly 10 meters square, dominated by a raised platform of steel and composite material mounted on a reinforced concrete base. Monitoring equipment lined the walls. Spectral analyzers, displacement sensors, thermal arrays, tended by a technical staff of 4. The room was warm. Patrick Lusk was sitting on a metal bench near the platform, reading something on a tablet. He was mid-30s, brown-haired, with the kind of lean build that comes from sustained physical conditioning rather than gym work. He looked up when I entered, and his face was the face from every vault and wall and floor I had examined over the past month. The same bone structure, the same jaw, the same orbital ridges. Alive, his features had a mobility that the mummified versions lacked, expressions moving across a face I had only known in dried stillness. "You're the field analyst," he said, "the one who's been finding me." "Martin Dole." "Patrick Lusk, though I suppose you already know that." He set the tablet down. The screen held a crossword puzzle, half filled in block capitals. He noticed me looking at it. "I used to do range drills before a transit," he said. "Now I do things with boxes that aren't made of concrete." It was almost a joke. It did not survive contact with the room. Kemp said you had questions, Patrick said. I'll tell you what I can. He talked about Object Meridian like someone who had given the briefing before, and the careful flatness of someone who hated giving it. The object was first found in 1887 during the demolition of a coal company office building in Schuylkill County. Workers cracked the limestone foundation and discovered something embedded deep in the stone, a dense, irregularly shaped mass that their tools could not cut, chip, or separate from the surrounding material. The building was condemned. A new structure went up on the same site. When that second building was demolished 40 years later, the object was found again, deeper, fused into the newer concrete foundation. It had migrated forward. Each demolition and rebuild cycle pushed it into the next generation of construction, always deeper, always into structural material built for permanent use. By the 1950s, it had traveled through 6 successive buildings. By the 70s, it was inside federal vault foundations. The pattern suggested it would eventually surface, but only if the chain of construction remained unbroken. The calibrator lets me go back through that chain, Patrick said. He held up a device I recognized, the same size and shape as the object I had seen fused into the Philadelphia corpse's hand. This is the portable component. It generates a displacement field around my body that separates me from the structural material of the target era. When the field holds, the concrete around me becomes passable. I can move through it the way you'd move through gravel. I find Meridian. I grip it, and the calibrator pulls me forward to the present. That's the theory. That's the theory. And when the field fails, his thumb moved along the casing of the device, back and forth, following a seam I could not see. Then the concrete treats me like aggregate. I set with the pour, become part of the structure. He said it professionally. The professionalism was skin deep. I could see where it had worn thin, the thumb on the casing, the way he did not look directly at the platform, the way his eyes moved once toward the reinforced window and away again. You've seen photographs of the results, I said. Every one. Kemp makes sure I review them before each transit. He says it sharpens my focus, keeps the field calibration precise. I let that sit. Making a man study pictures of his own corpse before sending him to risk producing another one was either ruthlessly practical or something uglier, and I could not yet tell which. I moved away from Patrick and examined the transit platform. The base was a concrete and steel slab, heavily reinforced, mounted on isolation dampeners that connected it to the building's foundation. The surface was smooth, grey, industrial. I knelt beside it and studied the pour. Patches. 7 distinct sections where the platform surface had been cut out and repoured. 7 circular or oval areas, each roughly the diameter of a human torso, where the original concrete had been replaced with fresh material. The colour match was close, but imperfect. Under the right light, each patch was slightly different from the original surface. "What are these?" I asked a technician who was adjusting a sensor bank nearby. His name badge read Urquhart, D. Dale Urquhart glanced at the patches and then at the door, as though checking whether Kemp had followed me down. "Platform repairs. Transit events sometimes damage the surface." 7 repairs. Were these from 7 separate transits? "I'm not authorized to give you operational numbers." "Were they from arrivals or departures?" Urquhart adjusted his sensor and did not answer immediately. He was older than the other technicians, grey at the temples with the careful posture of a man who had learned to say less than he knew. "Arrivals," he said finally. "Departures are clean. The calibrator handles outbound displacement precisely. It's the return that produces material integration errors." "Has anyone ever returned to this platform alive?" His hands moved on the sensor housing with a precision that suggested the adjustment was complete, and he was continuing the motion to keep his fingers busy. "Pieces have," Urquhart said. I left the sub-level carrying that answer and everything it implied. In the elevator, Ascending through the familiar floors of a building I had worked in for nearly a decade, I placed my palm flat against the wall. The concrete was warm. A low vibration moved through it. Slow, arrhythmic, too deep for the building's climate systems and too irregular for any equipment I could identify. I held my hand there until the elevator stopped. The vibration continued through every floor. When I reached ground level, I went directly to the building's records division and requested the architectural plans for the Arlington campus. I found what I was afraid of finding. The 2011 sub-level renovation, the one that created the floor where Keystone now operated, had been specified personally by Kemp. Walls poured to 2.4 meters in thickness, far beyond any structural or blast protection requirement. Rebar density that matched no engineering standard in the Bureau's own construction guidelines, and the concrete mix called for a composite aggregate sourced from a single quarry in Schuylkill County, Pennsylvania, the same county where Object Meridian was first documented in 1887. I sat at the records desk with the plans spread in front of me, and the warmth of the building pressed up through the floor, through my shoes, into the bones of my feet. I had spent 15 years walking into rooms and examining what should not be there. I had trusted the floors to be solid, and the walls to be ordinary, and the agency that paid my salary to be engaged in the rational work of documentation and containment. The building I was sitting in had been poured with material from the place where the anomaly was born, reinforced beyond reason by the man who ran the program, and built above a chamber where a living operative was being fed into the walls of history. Every surface I touched was warm. Kemp scheduled the next transit for 48 hours after my first visit to the sublevel. He told me personally, standing in the corridor outside my office on the second floor, his hands in his pockets and his tone administrative. A routine launch, target site, a government records facility in Kansas City, where the calibration team estimated Object Meridian was currently embedded in a late 1990s foundation pour. Patrick would displace backward to that structural era, locate the object, and attempt extraction. Kemp invited me to observe. "You've seen the evidence, you've seen the facility, now see the operation itself. Then you'll understand why the program continues despite the cost." I understood what he was doing. A controlled demonstration for the skeptical analyst. The curtain pulled back just far enough that the machinery behind it looked impressive, disciplined, worth the expense. I accepted the invitation because refusing would cut off my access, and because I needed to see the calibrator function in order to understand how it could be destroyed. That thought surprised me. I had not consciously decided to destroy anything. The idea had been forming in some sub-basement of my thinking since Los Alamos, since I had knelt over a dead man's face and seen my own suit on his body. It had solidified in the warm elevator of the Arlington building with the vibration pressing through the wall into my palm. The program was wrong. It went beyond danger, overclassification, and the quiet human expense of government programs whose costs can be hidden under clearance tiers. It was structurally wrong. The reports were not containing the anomaly. The classifications were not protecting the public. The institution had become formwork around the thing it claimed to study, and every transit poured another man into place. I spent the next 2 days reviewing everything I could access. The quarry records for the aggregate used in the 2011 renovation. The original 1887 survey documentation from Schuylkill County. Shipping manifests for construction materials moving through government contracts across 130 years. The picture that emerged was more specific and more disturbing than Kemp's briefing had suggested. The limestone from the original Pennsylvania site had been quarried, crushed, and redistributed through a chain of demolitions, sales, and salvaged material contracts that stretched across decades and continents. Every vault where a corpse had appeared, Philadelphia, Los Alamos, Zurich, Colorado Springs, Ottawa, Sao Paulo, Anchorage, had been constructed using aggregate, calcium powder, or reinforcement steel that traced back through 2 or 3 intermediate transactions to that same Schuylkill County origin point. Object Meridian had followed its own material. It migrated through construction history along supply chains of crushed stone and reprocessed calcium, embedding itself in whatever secure structure those materials were incorporated into. The Arlington building was the end of the chain. Kemp had made sure of that. The 2011 renovation had used aggregates sourced directly from the original quarry, the only direct shipment in over a century. Everything else had been diluted through intermediate use. Kemp had given the building a pure connection to the origin site, and then he had built the Keystone chamber directly above the deepest section of the foundation. He had built a landing pad. The transit chamber was crowded for an observation that Kemp called routine. All 4 technicians were at their stations. Urquhart supervised the calibrator controls from a console near the platform. Kemp stood in the monitoring alcove, separated from the main chamber by a reinforced window. I was positioned against the far wall, where I could see both the platform and the monitoring displays. Patrick entered in his field suit, the portable calibrator in his right hand. He looked the same as before, composed, focused, running his thumb along the device casing. He stepped onto the platform and took his position at the center, feet shoulder-width apart on the patched concrete. Transit parameters confirmed for Kansas City, Stratum 7. Target depth estimated at 4.2 meters below current grade, Urquhart said, reading from his console. Field coherence at 91%. Marginal, but within operational tolerance. Proceed, Kemp said through the intercom. The calibrator powered up, and I felt it before I heard it. A vibration began in the foundation and climbed through the walls and floor, building in density until the air itself seemed to compress. The monitoring displays showed displacement metrics I could not fully interpret, numbers and waveforms cascading across screens. Patrick's outline began to soften. The edges of his body lost definition, as though the light passing through him was bending around something that occupied the same space but belonged to a different era of construction. His face was the last thing to blur. For a moment I could see his expression clearly. Concentration, fear held at arm's length, and something that looked like resignation. Then the floor of the monitoring alcove split open. The sound came first, a wet, grinding crack, like a foundation settling under impossible weight. The concrete slab inside the alcove, 3 meters from where Kemp stood behind the reinforced glass, fractured along a line parallel to the window. Through the fracture, something rose, a human torso, upright, arms slack at its sides, head tilted forward with the chin resting on the collarbone. It emerged from the broken slab the way a nail surfaces from old wood, slowly, with resistance, trailing dust and calcium fragments from the material that had held it. The face was Patrick's. The body was mummified. The suit was agency standard. The concrete adhering to the torso and hips was still warm, still carrying moisture, still weeks away from full cure, despite having been poured during the 2011 renovation. The corpse had been inside this building, inside this room, inside the floor beneath Kemp's feet. It surfaced while the breathing version of the same man was still visible on the transit platform, his outline dissolving into displacement. For a span of time I could not have measured. I saw both of them. Patrick fading on the platform, his field suit losing material coherence. Patrick dead in the floor, his field suit stiff with calcium residue and age. The same man in 2 states, separated by the width of a room and an unknown number of failed arrivals. Then the Patrick on the platform was gone, and the Patrick in the floor remained. Urquhart's team scrambled. 2 technicians moved toward the corpse. The others locked onto their displays, calling readings to each other in terse, professional bursts. Kemp stood behind the reinforced window and stared at the fractured slab where the body had surfaced. His face was grey. "The concrete signature," I said to Urquhart. "Match it." He already had the scanner on the body. He read the results and said nothing for several seconds. Then, "It's ours. The 2011 POR, Sub-Level 3, Monitoring Alcove, Grid Section F9. This body has been embedded in our foundation for over a decade." And it just appeared. The displacement event may have triggered a sympathetic resonance in the structural timeline, brought something to the surface that was already there. He was reaching for explanations the way a drowning man reaches for floating rubble, grabbing whatever came close, regardless of whether it would hold weight. "It was already there," I said, "in our foundation, for 11 years, and we never detected it. The survey protocols don't scan below grade 3. There was never a reason to—" "There are 7 patches on the transit platform, Urquhart. 7 returns damaged enough to require cutting and repouring. How many more are down there that you never cut out? How many are in the walls right now?" He set the scanner down carefully, the way a man handles something fragile when his grip is no longer trustworthy. "I told you the number was classified," he said. Kemp's voice came through the intercom, steady and controlled, like a man who has decided to manage a catastrophe by treating it as an administrative problem. "Seal the monitoring alcove. Document the remains. Do not attempt extraction. Martin, step out of the chamber. Patrick will return from the Kansas City Transit within the standard window." "You're certain of that?" "The outbound displacement was clean. He'll arrive at the target stratum, conduct the search, and the calibrator will pull him back. Standard procedure." I looked at the corpse in the floor. Its right hand was curled around a device identical to the one Patrick had been holding when he stepped onto the platform. Every dead version of Patrick Lusk carried a calibrator. Everyone had been on a mission. Everyone had arrived in the wrong place, in the wrong era, and set into the POR like rebar. The gap was closing. The first corpses had appeared in foundations separated from the present by decades. The Los Alamos body was threaded through construction spanning 80 years. The Philadelphia body was in a 51-year-old wall. This one was in an 11-year-old slab. The failures were converging on the present. They were converging on this building. I left the chamber because Kemp ordered me to, and because I needed time in the records room with the architectural plans. There was something in the aggregate sourcing data I had missed. Something about the way the material supply chain connected every vault site to the same origin. I needed to see it laid out before Patrick came back. If Patrick came back. Before Kemp could reclassify the evidence. 7 hours later, an alarm sounded on the sublevel. I was still in the building. I had been in the records room for most of the interval, tracing material shipments, matching quarry output to construction contracts, and building a timeline that showed Object Meridian's migration path through 140 years of American infrastructure. The alarm was a deep, atonal pulse that came through the floor, through the foundation. I reached the freight elevator in under a minute. The sub-level access panel required a keycard I did not have. Urquhart appeared behind me, breathing hard, his own keycard already in his hand. "Something's coming through the platform," he said. The return sensors triggered before the calibrator initialized the recall sequence. "Whatever's arriving, it's arriving on its own." The elevator dropped. The doors opened onto the sub-level corridor, and the warmth hit me immediately. A dense, wet heat radiating from the walls, from the floor, from the 2.4 meters of concrete that separated us from the building's deepest structural layer. The air in the corridor tasted of calcium dust and something mineral and alkaline, like fresh cement exposed to water. The transit chamber door was open. 2 technicians stood outside it, unwilling to enter. Through the doorway I could see the platform. Patrick Lusk was alive. His voice tore through the chamber. His upper body was intact, arms free, chest heaving, head thrown back, the tendons in his neck standing rigid. His hands gripped the edges of the platform on either side of his hips, knuckles white, fingers digging into the composite surface. Below the waist, his body was gone. His hips, legs, pelvis, all of it had merged with the platform. The steel and concrete of the base flowed up around his torso in a smooth, unbroken gradient, the material thickening in real time as I watched. The concrete was setting. It climbed his rib cage at the speed of a slow pour, filling the space around his body the way a mold fills, conforming to every surface, every contour, every fold of his field suit. He had perhaps 90 seconds before it reached his diaphragm and locked his lungs. I crossed the chamber in 4 strides and dropped to my knees beside the platform. Patrick's face swung toward me. His eyes were wide and tracking, coherent, sharp with a terror that had burned through every professional defense he had ever built. Dull. His voice was raw, shredded, pushed through a chest that was losing room to expand. Do not send me back to the first vault. Patrick, we need to... Listen. The concrete reached the base of his ribcage. He gasped, forced the next words out. The bodies aren't failures. I looked down at the platform, at the material rising around him. They're anchors, he said. Mine, every one. Behind me, Urquhart stopped moving. Patrick's grip tightened until the composite cracked under his fingers. Meridian uses them. Attachment points. Structural nodes. 1 body per generation. 1 pour to the next. That's how it moves. His chest hitched. The concrete climbed higher. The vaults weren't accidents. It draws them. Draws construction, security, walls around itself. We build the next shell, and it moves into it. You touched it, I said. He nodded once, hard, as though the motion cost him less than speaking. Kansas City. I found it. Put my hands on it. Then I saw the chain. His eyes stayed on mine. Every wall, every foundation, every version of me holding a place open. The concrete reached his lower sternum. His breath shortened to quick, wet compressions. Meridian is here, he said. In this building. Kemp brought the aggregate. On purpose. I know, I found the shipping records. Then you know why he keeps sending me. The words came smaller now. He was choosing them because he had no air to waste. Each anchor pulls it forward, closer to surface. He thinks he's retrieving it. He's feeding it. The portable calibrator lay near his right hand, half sunk in the forming concrete. Its casing shivered against the platform. Destroy the calibrator, Patrick said. The concrete pressed into his chest. Chain stops. We hold it. All of us. He tried to breathe and got almost nothing. Prison, he said. Not pathway. The paw closed around his shoulders. His chin dropped. His jaw worked once, twice, trying to force air through lungs that had no room to fill. His right hand released the platform edge and reached toward me. Past the device, past the mission, toward the nearest living person in the room. I reached back. I was too slow. The concrete took his arm, his hand, his fingers. The surface smoothed over as though he had never been there. The platform was quiet. The setting material cooled. Within 2 minutes, the surface looked the same as every other patch. A smooth grey oval, slightly different from the original pour in colour and texture, indistinguishable from the 7 that had preceded it. 8 patches now. Urquhart stood behind me. He had watched everything. His face was the face of a man who had spent years knowing something was wrong, and had just heard the wrongness described in terms that left no room for professional distance. How many transits has Kemp authorized? I asked. 31, Urquhart said. Counting this one. Kemp arrived in the chamber 4 minutes after Patrick died. He walked in from the corridor, composed, his breathing steady, his expression arranged into the mask of administrative concern that senior officials use when the situation has moved beyond their control, but they intend to behave as though it has not. The operative experienced cognitive distortion from temporal displacement, he said. It's a documented side effect. The information he provided under duress should be treated as unreliable. He said the chain is almost complete. He said you've been building it on purpose. He was fused into a concrete platform and dying. Men say things under those conditions that reflect fear, not understanding. He said he touched Object Meridian. Kemp stepped closer to the platform and looked down at the fresh patch where Patrick's body had been. His expression did not change. The program will continue with a new operative. The calibration data from this transit will allow us to refine the displacement parameters. The next attempt will have a higher success probability. A new operative, I said. You'll find someone else willing to be fed into a wall. I'll find someone who understands the stakes. Kemp looked at me like a man who believes institutional authority is the only real authority, and that anyone who works for the institution will eventually defer to it. You've seen the evidence, Martin. You've seen the program. You understand what Meridian is and what it may be worth. The retrieval will continue. He left the chamber. I stayed beside the platform for a long time, my hand resting on the surface near the newest patch, feeling the warmth of the concrete as it completed its cure around the bones of a man who had begged me to end the process that killed him. I did not go home that night. I sat in my office on the second floor and reviewed everything. The vault reports, the material chain, the quarry records, the architectural specifications, the timeline of Patrick's 31 transits and their corresponding remains distributed through a century and a half of construction. The picture was complete enough. Object Meridian migrated forward by using fused human remains as structural anchors. The calibrator provided those anchors by displacing a human body into the wrong structural period, where the body integrated with the pore and became part of the foundation. Every transit Kemp authorized risked adding another link to the chain. Some had produced external corpse sites. Some had produced platform patches. Some had produced nothing detectable at all. The chain now extended from 1887 to the present, terminating in the foundation of the building I was sitting in, beneath a transit platform that held 8 versions of the same man in 8 layers of patched concrete. If the calibrator was destroyed, new anchors could no longer form. Object Meridian would remain at its current position, inside the Arlington building's foundation, fully arrived but contained by the concrete and steel that surrounded it. Every anchor would remain in place, every version of Patrick permanently embedded, and the structural integrity of the building would be the only thing between the object and the surface. If Kemp continued, the chain would complete. More anchors, more forward migration, another operative, then another, until the object moved through the final layer of foundation and surfaced. No one knew what Meridian did when it was free. The object's documented properties were limited to architectural migration and the exploitation of human remains as structural nodes. Beyond those observations, it was unknown. Kemp's confidence that the retrieval was worth the cost was built on a faith that an object willing to consume human bodies for 140 years would become useful once extracted. That faith was institutional arrogance dressed in scientific language. At 3:07 in the morning, a message appeared in my internal queue. Subject field blank. Signature field blank. Body text limited to a maintenance code and a time window. Exterior chamber lock fails open during transfer. Camera recording disabled on local power. I read it once. Then I deleted it. The fire axe was mounted in a glass-fronted case at the emergency station on sub-level 2, between the freight elevator and the corridor that led to the Keystone facility. I took the elevator down at 3:20. The sub-level was empty. The technicians worked day shifts unless a transit was scheduled. Kemp was in a closed briefing on the 4th floor. I had checked his calendar. The axe came out of the case with a clean pull. I carried it down the corridor, feeling the heat of the walls intensify with each step, the concrete radiating a warmth that had nothing to do with climate control and everything to do with what was embedded in the foundation beneath my feet. The transit chamber door opened when I pressed the latch. The calibrator's main housing stood beside the platform, a cabinet-sized unit connected to the platform base by conduits and power couplings. Its status lights pulsed in a slow rhythm, synchronized with the vibration in the floor. I swung the axe into the housing. The casing split along its weld line, exposing circuit arrays and a dense computational core that looked more like compressed mineral than silicon. I swung again. The power couplings separated with a burst of white sparks. I swung a third time, and the core cracked. The pieces fell apart with a dry, granular sound, like stone breaking along a natural fault. The vibration in the foundation stopped. I stood in the chamber with the axe in my hands and felt it go. The deep, arrhythmic grinding that had been pressing through every surface of the building since my first visit. The pulse I had felt in the elevator wall, in the records room floor, in the warm concrete under my shoes, ceased. The silence it left behind was physical, a sudden absence of pressure, as though a weight distributed through every slab and column had simply released. The walls began to cool. I could feel the change against my skin, a slow withdrawal of heat from the concrete surfaces around me, degree by degree, the temperature dropping towards something normal. The transit platform cracked. A long branching fracture ran through the surface, splitting each of the 8 repair patches along its perimeter. The patches held, but the bond between them and the original pour had weakened, as though whatever structural coherence had been maintaining the surface was withdrawing back into the foundation. Urquhart found me there 20 minutes later. He stood in the doorway and looked at the ruined calibrator, the cracked platform, and the axe still in my hands. He did not speak. He looked at the platform for a long time, at the 8 patches where 8 versions of Patrick Lusk were sealed into the concrete. Then he looked at me and nodded once, the way one professional acknowledges another's judgment in a situation where the rules no longer apply. I walked out of the chamber, out of the sub-level, up through the building. Every floor I crossed, I was aware of what lay beneath it. The stairwells, the corridors, the office where I had spent 9 years writing reports about anomalies in other people's buildings. All of it rested on a foundation that contained an object of unknown capability, held in place by the fused remains of a man who had been sent into walls 31 times and had come back from it once, for 90 seconds, to tell me what he had become. In the parking garage on sub-level 1, I stopped at a load-bearing column. The column was unremarkable. Square, poured concrete, part of the original 1960s construction, one of 40 identical supports holding up the building above. I placed my hand on it. The surface was body temperature. Through the aggregate finish, pressed against my palm, I could feel a subtle texture beneath the surface. A contour, a ridge, something that might have been the impression of a knuckle or the edge of a jaw or the curve of a device gripped in a hand that had been holding on for 60 years. The material was warm and solid and yielded nothing. Whatever was in there would stay in there as long as the column stood. I drove out of the garage in the grey light before sunrise. Behind me, the Arlington building sat low and unremarkable against the skyline, a block of mid-century concrete and glass that looked exactly like what it was. A federal office building, functional, unbeautiful, built to last. I knew it differently now. Every wall, every floor, every column and slab and foundation layer was a page in a migration record that stretched back to 1887. A man's body threaded through the structural history of a continent, holding something in place that had been travelling toward the present for longer than the agency had existed. Kemp would find the calibrator destroyed by morning. He would know I had done it. There would be an investigation, a reclassification, a disciplinary hearing conducted in the quiet, procedural language federal agencies use when the truth is too large and too strange for official acknowledgement. I would lose my clearance. I might lose my career. The agency would continue to occupy the building because the building was functional and well located, and no one outside Keystone would have any reason to question its structural integrity. I filed my final report from my apartment that morning. I classified it at the highest tier my credentials allowed and addressed it to no institutional recipient, just to the file, to the record, to whoever might open it decades or centuries from now when the building reached the end of its service life and someone authorized its demolition. The report contained everything: the vault corpses, the material chain, the calibrator, Patrick's final testimony, the aggregate sourcing, the migration pattern, and the object's current position within the Arlington Foundation. The subject line was the only recommendation I had the authority to make, and the only one that mattered. Structural permanence review, Arlington campus. Priority, do not demolish. The building would hold. The concrete would cure harder with each passing year. The anchors, Patrick, every version of him, threaded through every vault and foundation and wall across 140 years of construction, would remain where they were, embedded, load-bearing, keeping object meridian fixed in place the way rebar keeps a structure from cracking under its own weight. But buildings come down. I knew that from 15 years of walking into rooms where the walls had failed and the floors had given way and the things inside had become visible. Every structure is temporary. Every pore has a lifespan. The concrete will crack, the rebar will corrode, and someday the aggregate will be crushed and sorted and shipped to a new site. Whatever is held inside will travel with it, the way it has always traveled. Forward, deeper, into whatever we build next. I finished the report and closed my laptop and sat in my kitchen with the morning sun coming through the window. I thought about Patrick Lusk's hand reaching for me in the last seconds before the concrete took it. He had been trying to hold on to something that was not a wall. He had been reaching for a person. I had been too slow, and the pour had been too fast, and now he was part of the structure, and the structure was all that stood between the object and the open air. I hoped the building would last a long time. I hoped whoever read my report would understand that the subject line was not a suggestion. And I hoped, without any evidence to support the hope, that 31 versions of a man sealed in concrete across a century and a half of architecture was enough to hold.